Yakwe, thank you, Ambassador, and good evening, good morning to colleagues. We don't have a lot to add in regard to the specifics of this week's event at MEPC. To a large degree, our role is providing advice to our Pacific delegates is now over. We've provided the best analysis and evidence we can. Now it's very much up to our diplomats to take forward and see how far they can take both ambition and the levy. The board is set, the dice rolled. I think we all understand the issues and what is it at stake for a 1.5-degree agenda in this next session. I did, though, want to take this opportunity to pause from looking at the immediate issues of this MEPC and pose some questions that we will see be critical for us all to discuss as we drive ambition beyond next week. Firstly, I'd just like to review the positioning we put up at the first bwebwenato and fact-check whether the events of the last few weeks since last we met have altered this. We had identified only two priorities for the Pacific at MEPC. The first is to ensure that the absolute need for a greatly increased level of ambition in the revised strategy is agreed by the committee. We don't see any reason to suggest that this objective is still not valid and remains our highest priority. Our second priority is setting the carbon price. There will be entry points for this in both the discussion on the IMRB and the promise session on MTMs. I note the UNSG only last week, and I quote, "Zero carbon ships must become the competitive choice by 2030, and we need credible market-based measures to get there," unquote. The Pacific has tried very hard to deliver on this directive. We are still firmly of the view that the greenhouse gas levy we have submitted is the only option tabled and is the best solution going forward. We are a little concerned at the increasing voices who are framing our proposal as a good first try and diluting it by now calling for others to bring alternatives forward at some ill-defined future point. We don't mind debating our proposal against others. In fact, we welcome it. But we do note that if we can get this proposal across the line with zero resources and from the weakest position possible, there really is no excuse for any other actor not to get to the starting line promptly as well, not unless they have vested interests in delay. This is a climate emergency. It deserves urgency. So we would still like to see the committee confirm our proposal as the subject of a dedicated ISWG before MEPC77, and we would welcome others who have alternative practical proposals to offer to be ready to be tabled them by then. We have added a third objective, and that is the absolute need to focus on the narrative. This cropped up repeatedly throughout the debriefs during IAWSG, and yet we never actually addressed it in the chamber. This theme also underlines the varied responses to the intense media that has been greatly generated. Clearly, we feel the voice of ambition was not reflected adequately in the processes of debate at the IAWSG. At this MEPC, with COP on the horizon, IMO is spotlit like it never has been in its history. Principles and process both matter. Both were missing 2 weeks ago. There was a lot of focus at IWSG on the numbers and whether there was a majority of support at plenary. The vote was not over whether 58 states thought 22 is a good or a bad number. It was a poll on ambition and whether we are going to do what is actually needed for 1.5 or only what is politically accepted to a small group and certainly not a majority of all delegates. We are aware of the intense efforts currently underway to attempt to rally more members, but we are asking if we really thought through what is we are offering those missing voices. Do we understand what this debate means for them? So I'd like to offer 3 questions for us this evening. Why isn't there equitable representation at IMO? Why aren't those voices already being heard, and what would they say if one could hear them? And we suspect the question of what exactly do we mean by an equitable transition underlies both of these. An equitable transition. It sounds nice, and we have waited long enough for the use of the word equitable to be heard in this debate. But do we really understand what it means? Is it what we mean when we say disproportionate negative impact? Or is it more than this? If we don't, we have an equitable revised strategy. Will it prove durable? Will it be sustainable? I've always loved this cartoon. It says a lot about the situation the climate vulnerable are in across the negotiating spectrum, not only at IMO. It's important to note, even when we get the boxes distributed correctly, the box people are still standing outside the fence, watching all the folks sitting on the bleachers. The polling at IWSG had a total of 58 member states participating in the last decision-making processes. These graphs are work we did with Isabel after MEPC74. It seems pretty clear. SIDS and LDCs alone are 67 available votes at MEPC. Why have we left it to the last moment to recruit them? If there is to be an equitable transition, surely this must start with the decision-making process itself at IMO. The term level playing field is continually echoed at IMO and as a prerequisite for supporting any measure by the industry. But IMO is an organization of member states, and when we look at which states play which role in the industry, grouped by shipbuilders, owners, flags, and breakers, it is clearly far from a horizontal spread. Ships are built in Asia, owned in the large economies, flagged in the margins, and broken in India. I've highlighted 2 states here, Marshall Islands and Bangladesh. We assume that Bangladesh will maintain its current role in the industry during the transition. The most dirty, dangerous, least skilled, and least financially rewarding role of an actor. Decarbonization likely means an increased workload as stranded assets are increasingly abandoned. The climate change means the tide will continue to rise on the Sitakunda beaches. Surely an equitable transition includes now building to EU and ILO standards, next generation recycling complexes that pay workers living wages. How much would this cost? 1 billion, 10 billion, 50 billion? Which type of MBM can accommodate this scenario? Would such investment count as offsets? Would the EU commit to spending the revenue generated by its ETS outside the region on projects such as this? Some of the revenue? All of the revenue? What is the equitable pathway forward? Compared with breaking ships, flagging ships is arguably a relatively clean industry. When Tony de Bruym was asked at IMO in 2015 if he was committing his registry to leading decarbonization. His answer was that if RMI went alone, this would simply expose his flag to tonnage flight. De Bruym argued IMO needed to regulate for collective action. In 2021, RMI is again potentially exposing one of its few strategic assets to risk in order to drive global ambition. We argue that the greenhouse gas levy we have proposed is the best option for the industry. It provides certainty. It will assist drive a whole new economic revolution for investors in the sector. But what would a truly equitable transition look like for small Pacific states earning foreign exchange from hosting registries? We all know that the flags game isn't strictly clean and risk-free. But what other options do we have? What if we were to propose a new registry, a transparent Pacific registry that only flagged high ambition ships? Would Maersk and Swire and the others pledge zero by 2050 agree to flag their fleets with us in return? When we do outreach to the climate vulnerable, like those 67 seats LDC IMO votes we wanted so desperately at IWSG, can we answer this question honestly and say, yes, this is a global problem, it must be a global solution, and we will leave none behind? How do we assure our colleagues this is not just one more empty promise? Thank you, Ambassador, for the opportunity to pose these questions. We don't profess to have all or even any of the answers, and we look forward to a constructive and equitable exchange of views.